Okey dokey. Representative Alred? Representative Andrew? Representative Berger?
Here.
Representative Brown?
Here.
Representative Clausten? Representative Lawley?
Here.
Representative Obermueller?
Here.
Representative Provenza?
Here.
Chairman Northrup?
Here. Thank you. Also forgot to say that we're gonna work House Bills 32 and 34 because Representative Newsom, thank you, is recovering. She'll be back with us on Tuesday, and so Wednesday we'll go ahead and work 137 at that time. So, all right. So we're gonna start out with educational mill levies amendments, which is House Bill number 32. It's a joint education bill. So it's up to us. Okay. Is anybody here from the Department of Education? No? Do you understand the bill well enough to walk us through it?
Chairman Northrup, I do not, but I can find someone that can take that.
Oh, we can fuddle our way through it, but I'm just,
Mr.
yes.
Chairman, the best way to lead this is to go to the extensive
Fiscal note.
fiscal note, because that describes everything that's in here.
All right, so everybody's had,
It bounces around a lot, so that's the best way to track it.
oh, my economist tells me the money's the best way to handle this, so we're gonna go that route. The fiscal note says this bill provides the reauthorization for the special school tax levy for adult education in our Wyoming statute. Currently, two school district electors have approved this school tax levy. One district in 2000 approved a mill levy not to exceed 1.5 mils. Another district in 2006 approved a mill levy not to exceed 2.5 mils. Section 2 of this bill would require school districts with an adult education mill levy authorized under Wyoming statute prior to the effective date of this bill to submit a proposition of continuing the mill levy of the fifth general election following the effective date of the bill. This bill may result in greater number of school districts board-approved BOCES, or Board of Cooperative Education Services, mill levies. This bill amends Wyoming statute to limit the total number of school district board-approved mill levies authorized regardless of the number of BOCES agreements that do not exceed 1.5 mils. Of the 48 school districts, 45 have at least one BOCES agreement. Of the 45 school districts with the BOCES agreement, 36 school districts have a board-approved mill levy. There are also 28 school districts with 30 BOCES agreements that have no mill levy approved for this agreement. Of the 36 districts with the board-approved mill levy, 19 school districts levy a 0.5 mil or less. Comprised of 17 school districts that levy a 5/10 mil for one agreement. One school district levies a 5/10 mil for two agreements, and one school district levies a 3.50 mil for the school districts, or 0.350, yes, sorry, left the decimal out. Of the 17 remaining school districts, 11 levy more than a half mil for the two agreements, and 6 levy more than a half mil for 3 agreements. The two school districts currently level the maximum board approved mill levies under this bill of 1.5. So that's 2 districts doing that. Table 1 authorizes the school district board approved mill levies by both these agreements in 2022 tax year. This bill also amends to increase the limit of the community college district board approved BOCES mill levies when combined with the school district voter approved BOCES mill levies from 2 to not to exceed 2.5. Currently, 3 school districts have a voter approved 0.5 mil and 1 school district has a voter approved 2 mils. 4 community school districts boards assess a 0.5 mil and 1 assesses a 0.331 mil. 1 school district with the voter approves 2 mils. The community college district with the board approves a 0.331 mil, have a BOCES agreement, and the total combined mills is equal to 2.331 mils. All right, I'm gonna turn it to the community colleges first and see what they have to say. Please. That was a horrible explanation. Sorry. You had to endure that. Welcome, Dr. Caldwell.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Sandy Caldwell. I'm Executive Director of the Wyoming Community College Commission. I'm only here to provide just some information on the component of this bill draft that impacts the community colleges. This really just creates an additive. Other components of this bill create a ceiling for the total mills that can be levied within I believe it's subject to a county in which those BOCES can be formed. So it creates a ceiling that still falls under the Title 39. I'm going to look at Director Hanson. Am I getting the correct Title 39 of the Wyoming statutes? And so subject to that, what the component does for the community colleges is currently the K-12 districts can assess the 2 mills, the colleges can assess a 0.5 of a mill, but combined, they cannot assess a 2.5. So if for example, the school district were fully consume the 2 mills, then the college district within that BOCES, for the purposes of that BOCES, could not assess any. Further, if the community college was to assess a full 0.5, then it would restrict the school districts to 1.5. So this is simply to create an additive for that component of the college, the BOCES that include the college to be 2.5, subject to the total ceiling and subject to Title 39 already. That's as simple as that component of the bill.
Very good. Questions? Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Might I say you're my favorite chairman. Dr. Caldwell, I am understanding. I'm going to just come out and admit this. I don't remember this bill from the interim a whole bunch. I vaguely remember the discussions. But ultimately what I remember this bill being was fixing statutory language that we have, namely. But second of all, it was putting the cap, as you just said, and restricting that you cannot have a community college charging basically the same mill levy, their maximum mill levy, and the school district charging their maximum mill levy for a BOCES. Am I understanding that correctly? Do I remember that correctly?
Go ahead, Dr. Caldwell.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, this one is a fix, that is my understanding. We didn't work on this one during the interim, and when it came out, I had to go watch the committee meetings myself to make sure, and then work with the Attorney General to make sure that their office, to make sure I understood it. So right now, it does restrict, it's not additive. It is summative to the 2 regardless of which one assesses it. So this was to fix that component. So you're correct, it's a fix so that it's additive. However, it's still subject to the total limit that didn't exist, that this bill does address for the BOCES under the current Title 39 as well. So it's what the counties can assess. This now puts a ceiling on the BOCES and then allows within that limit summative of the 2 and the 0.5.
Further questions? Go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So explain, when I look at the bill, it looks like they're authorizing an additional $0.5 mil within the broader framework. And on page 5 of it, do you have the bill in front of you?
Mr. Chairman, I can go get it very quickly.
Thank you. That section involves community colleges. So. So this is under the tax, this is under Title 39, actually, tax rates. And there's under Section H, and on page 5 of the bill, the following shall apply to property tax for community colleges. There shall be annually levied and assessed upon the tax taxable value of the property within the limits of the community college district. A special levy not to exceed the number of mills provided in Wyoming Statute 2120-110H, which is the BOCES part of the statute, which is the 1/2 mill. It looks like there's an additional 1/2 mill tax, Mr. Chairman, so I just want that cleared up.
Dr. Caldwell, have you had enough time to digest it?
Mr. Chairman, almost, I believe, because I'm not completely fluent on that. Okay, so I believe I have this correct. Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermueller, I'm going to attempt my best to answer this question. When a special school district task for a BOCES is passed, that is separate from a BOCES that is includes the community colleges and how they can structure it. So that is, I'm reading it right now. So that section does not pertain to the community colleges. This is where I had to work with the Attorney General on this one. So on page 3, where you see lines 10 through 13, that's for the special schools district taxes. That doesn't involve the community college BOCES. And then when you flip to page 5, you begin where they have included the community college district BOCES. So those are just separate components that we had to step through. And then under the page 5, lines 10 through 14, then involve the BOCES that include the colleges. So they're slightly different. For the purposes of a district, a BOCES that includes a community college district, for the purposes of the adult learners, the school district is allowed 2. The community colleges are allowed 0.5 for that maximum of the BOCES. So that is slightly different for the special purpose. And I was looking at Representative Brown to help give me a lifeline. As there's 2 slightly different, they're different things. It's just why we had to work with the Attorney General to step through. Now, have I made it
Mr.
worse?
Chairman, I think that probably the Department of Revenue will, when they testify, will be able to straighten that part of it out, so we can probably move on.
We're looking
For
to
now.
him for that, so there you go. Further questions for Dr. Caldwell? Go ahead, Dr. Clausen. Representative Clausen.
Actually, it is, but no, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Dr. Caldwell, I'm just trying to remember the voting on this. Does this go to the public and the public votes on it in the general election? Or is this separate?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Dr.
Representative Clouston, this is what is allowed for the boards to move without an election. If they were to seek more funding, they would have to have an election. And Mr. Chairman, and the community colleges are maxed at their total mills that they can do. And then this one puts a ceiling, and then Title 39, and I will let Director Hinton fix what I'm about to say, maxes that total for the counties as well. Yeah, she's looking.
Further questions? Further questions for Dr. Caldwell? All right, thank you. Would the Department of Revenue like to come up and straighten us all out? Please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. I admit I did not follow this bill as it went through the interim process. However, in just reading the language, it does attempt to address both the, when you have school districts, the K through 12 that are joining together with a cooperative agreement, and it talks and speaks to their language, but I believe to the community college, I do believe that there's an additional $0.5 million to Representative Obermueller's point that this bill is attempting to add. And if that was not the case, I don't believe you would have to have the amended language that's identified on page 4, lines 7 and 8. I think the 2 mills would have sufficed, but they are adding that additional half mil. So it's my, with initial glance and not spending a great deal of research time in Title 21, that it is actually adding a half mil there on community colleges.
Okay. Questions for Ms. Hessen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, go ahead.
So
Again, I said doctor in my mind, so Representative
thank you, Mr.
Klausner,
Chairman.
go ahead.
So I just want to be clear here, is this an extra half mil that will be, or could be taxed to our property owners and our industries?
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, Representative Clausen, I believe so. And keeping in mind that all of these mills for BOCES are outside of the other K through 12 mills that are identified in statute, the 25, the 12, the 6. So this would just be specific to BOCES.
That answer the questions? Anybody else have any more questions for department? Yes?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So, so are we raising a tax? Is that what we're doing right now? Without authority from the voters?
Go ahead.
Oh.
I was gonna say, the bill stipulates that it has to be voted on by the duly elected board.
And Mr. Chairman, to follow up Representative Berger, I believe that one of the concerns that this bill was trying to address was statutory authority that already existed for that half mil, but it was the total that was limited by the 2. And when you added up the pieces, it added up to 2.5 mils if they exercised all of the authority that was currently in statute.
Understand? Okay. Any more questions for Department Revenue? Okay, thank you. We're getting the mud cleared up a little bit. Oh, I stole his. You're good. He's paperless. He doesn't care. Anybody else like to speak on the bill? Is there anybody from the Department of Education? Ryan Farmer? You're standing.
Mr. Chairman, Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. I'll begin by saying I did not plan on talking about this, but I want to see if I can help the committee find your way through what's going on here. So let's back way, way, way up. What is a BOCES? A Board of Cooperative Educational Services, BOCES. Now, in reality, there's kind of 3 different types of BOCES. There's a special ed BOCES, and that's where the school districts come together. They create a cooperative entity to provide special education services. There is an early childhood BOCES, where school districts can come together and provide early childhood services. And the third type is sometimes referred to as a BOCES. It adds an H in there because it's higher education. And so you have these different types of cooperative educational service type agencies. And really, we have some unclear parts under our current law. So you talk about, are we adding extra mills or not adding extra mills or anything like that? Let me go back to the bill and kind of show you a couple of places where we have that disparity. And I'm sorry, I need to get the page version because I've just got the online whole deal. Okay, so let's take a look on page 2 and line 5 of the bill. Right there you see 2.5 mils. So here we are under 21-12-103, and we're talking about this authorization of up to 2.5 mils. But then you do get down to page 4, lines 7 and 8, and current law says 2 mils. So in a way, we're just making sure that all BOCES are created equal, that whether you're talking the early childhood, the special education, the higher ed, we are making sure that the cap is consistent as we talk about all of these. So the cap is being set at 2.5. The place that you're at there on page 4 is where we're talking about community college districts, their ability to levy mills. So really, community colleges have been at an kind of an unfair place as opposed to school districts. School districts have been at 2.5, community colleges have been at 2. So if you're going to kind of have this partnership, it's really just putting the two entities on the same playing field where they can both have their cap of 2.5. So really, the intent of this bill as we went through the interim is we've got this confusing language in statute, and not that this makes it less confusing, but let's go out there and let's look at ordinary practice. Let's see what's happening in our school districts, in our community colleges, and let's make sure that the statutory language mirrors what's happening today. And so this statutory language is intended to provide clarity and mirror what's happening today. So nobody who has approved a BOCES is going to be out there and have to eliminate that BOCES because of this law. And anybody who may have interpreted the current law in a conservative manner may have an ability to levy additional taxation because the current law left confusion. Districts were interpreting the law differently and were therefore acting differently. So this is really just about providing clarity. The caps are at 2.5 mils on both sides, on the school district side and on the community college side. And the bill is intended then to really just identify what is in practice now. Nobody will have to stop their current BOCES, no programs go away. Everybody is able to have their current BOCES at the caps that are now in this statutory language. So for the most part, the intent of this bill through the interim was just let's codify and capture what's really happening in our school districts. Now, there is an additional piece. The question came up, do we have to have voters vote on this? And so the answer to that is yes. When it happened, the initial imposition of the mill does go to the voters, but there has never historically been a renewal of that by the voters. So the school district could impose the tax, the voters approve the tax, and then it's just on the books. This does have a provision that says, let's go back to the voters every once in a while and make sure that they're still good with that extra taxation. And so that language that you see at the bottom of page 2, all of that new language really is just intending to say, let's go back to the voters once in a while at each 5th general election to make sure that that we're getting their approval for these taxes. So it's really not about any kind of taxation in addition to what's already out there. It's really just intended to clarify the practices because when you have go to page 3, line 9, you have this vague language of not to exceed 1/2 mil. So is that on total 1/2 mil, or is that on each BOCES 1/2 mil? You know, what does this mean? And so this is, again, the extra language in all of this bill is intended to provide more clarity to districts. So in a way, the reason this wasn't memorable through the interim is because you were assured this is just what's happening in practice today. This is nothing new. This is a codification of current practice and making sure that we have in statute what's actually being done by school districts and by community colleges. So without having planned to say anything, hopefully that's the least confusing that I can be. And I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
And we have one right off the bat. Go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Brian. Then going back to the page 5 language, which seems to be pretty specific in its directive, line 10. There shall be an annually levied and assessed upon a taxable value that shall be. So are you saying that that's already in practice, that they do it and it's, and that's just memorializing what we're doing right now, and so they're just putting this in there? Is that what you're telling us, sir?
ahead,
Mr.
Brian.
Chairman. Representative Obermueller, I'm not as familiar with the Chapter 39 because now that's the taxation statutes. But my interpretation of what's going on here is, remember, there's a whole context of what else is there. This is, once that has been approved by the school district, and then if necessary by the voters, then now it is being directed that approved taxation shall take place. So it's not, the direction is to the taxing entity, the county, that you shall do it once it's been properly approved. So it will have to have gone through the approval process of approval by the school board, the community college, and potentially the voters. Once that process has happened, then it shall be levied.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I'm sure our revenue folks could provide greater clarity around that, but to the best of my understanding.
Thank you. Representative Lawley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Farmer, the renewal of the tax, and I'm glad you brought that up, on page 2, am I reading that correctly? Every 5th general election, which would equal 10 years. So there's a 10-year period before we go to the voters. So if I read that, is that your understanding of what it means by each 5th general election?
Go ahead, Mr. Farmer.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that would be correct. That is periodic. It's better than never or once. What is appropriate, I think, is up for discussion. There was discussion on that very matter at the final interim committee meeting, and the interim committee landed on this is an appropriate place to start.
Follow up?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So then we move to page 5, and we talked a little bit, and Representative Obermuller mentioned about this half-mil levy, and again, I do understand what you've said about the interpretation issue, and it was interpreted differently. So in some places, it's not an increase, but in other places would indeed be the authority to increase, where they had interpreted it, as you put it, the more conservative interpretation. So if we do that, then what will happen with that half in those places that hadn't previously been using it? We've given them now the authority to do that at a half-mil, and that would be done through board approval, and then another 10 years before the voters have an opportunity to weigh in on that. And I know they could indirectly do how they may, where they would reelect board members or things like that, but is that correct understanding of those two put together, the page 2, 5th general election, and the idea of this half-mil and how it would play out if we approved it?
Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead, Brian.
That is correct, with one other step in the middle of that,
Okay.
and that's the initial approval is followed by a vote of the general public. So the initial approval by the board, so if they added a half-mil in that community, it would still require the public to vote and approve that. And then 10 years later, the public would have to reapprove it as well. So it's not just imposed by a board from the beginning without voter approval. In the beginning, it requires voter approval, and this would add that periodically.
One more follow-up.
Go ahead, one more
Okay,
follow-up.
all right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so it would not become effective, even though we might approve it here to clarify what's being done, unless a board authorized it and the public voted in favor of it. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Brian.
Mr. Chairman, I believe, if I understand you correctly, yes. So if you're in a community that's not used that extra half-mil, that would take affirmative action of a board to approve it, affirmative action of the voters to approve it, and then it would be assessed. So there would be time for that to occur, and then it would be assessed. But that would be only for a new taxation, something that you are not currently being assessed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Further questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Brown or Chairman Brown, which is it? Go ahead.
I'm just curious, I'd like to ask the committee and not Mr. Farmer, is everybody getting what we're doing here? It took me a little bit of time and I finally figured it out.
Yeah.
Representative Provenza went up and was looking up meeting minutes, we're talking back and forth, so I just want to make sure the committee is understanding what's going on, or are we still trying to figure it out?
Go ahead and explain it.
Okay, I think I've got this, Mr. Chairman. And I do remember after having, Brian, thank you, because what you were stating was bringing back up the discussion from it was the October meeting. And then we voted on this in the November meeting, and I missed the November meeting. And so that's why I'm having a hard time remembering all of this. But ultimately, if you go to the fiscal note, what this really does, there's three things that it does. Section 2 of this bill requires school districts with an adult education mill levy authorized currently, that they've already had this adult education mill levy authorized. Prior to the effective date of this bill, they have to submit a proposition of continuing the mill levy at the 5th general election following the effective date of this bill. So if they have authorized it, if the board has authorized it and it's already in existence, they have to send it back out to their electors to continue that. The next part it does is it amends 2120-109A to limit the local number of school district board approved mill levies authorized regardless of the number of BOCES agreements. So if you have a single school district with 3 BOCES, for instance, they can't have a half mil for each one of those. They are saying they're capping the amount of mills, regardless of how many BOCES you have, you can only charge so many mills based on your mill levy capability. So that's the next one, and that is not to exceed 1.5 mils.
So in a way, that helps a community from not overtaxing property taxes.
I
Is
think,
that correct assessment?
I would say
No?
in an effort to not, Mr. Chairman.
Whoa, you
Mr.
guys-
Chairman, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
slow
Mr.
down.
Chairman,
Slow
go
down.
through the chair, Mr. Chairman,
Okay. So, go ahead, Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, without being a political answer, if I were to be sitting on that side and answering as just testimony, what I would say is it caps the availability regardless of the amount of BOCES. So it may protect from being overtaxing, but what it's ultimately doing is saying, regardless of how many BOCES agreements you have, you are only allowed to tax this much.
Mr. Chairman.
Please let Representative Brown finish his dissertation on educating us.
My question was to Representative Brown, but go ahead and finish.
Okay, and then the last thing that it does, Mr. Chairman, if you go down right below the table on the fiscal note, it says the bill also amends 2120-109H to increase the number of community college district board approved BOCES mill levy when combined with the school district voter approved BOCES mill levy from 2 mills to not exceed 2.5 mills. And that is in an effort to make sure that, as Mr. Farmer was saying, that the BOCES are all on equal playing field. So there was some stipulations that I remember very vaguely that some BOCES were maxed out at 2, some felt that they could go to 2.5. And when the discussion was occurring at this, it was going, why are we stopping this? If you have it in one county and not the other, why are we not allowing that to happen? Why don't we set this out to the voters? So that's what this ultimately does. Those are the 3 things that ultimately this bill encapsulates. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your indulgence on this.
I
very much so.
appreciate your indulgence too. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Overmule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Brown. So there's a little technical correction just under that graph that the bill also amends. That should be 2021-110H in case you start looking at this, at the details. And the other piece of it is I still get the idea that there is an authorized 1/2 mil above where we are now for college boards to approve an increase in the mill levy, that it does in fact have a tax increase component to it, which is why I think the statement in the second paragraph, this bill may result in a greater number of school district board-approved boards of cooperative educational services, increase the number of those mill levies. And those are board-approved. So I'm still hung up with that language. We need to know for sure if additional tax is authorized, because you know where that leads on the floor if we don't know that answer clearly, so.
So in the interest of our guest out here who's been sitting on the frying pan, can we have any more questions of Brian? Thank you, Mr. Farmer.
Brian, thank you.
Yep, thank you. Anybody else like to testify on the bill? Anybody else? Janine? She's gonna shed some more light.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Janine Bayteski from Teton County. Does everybody understand that there's two levels of participation that are being talked about here? There's one level where, and my district happens to be this, our maximum levy is a half of a mil because we are not part of a community college district. We are part of the Fremont County CWC district, which then has, this applies to. So there's two different levels of being discussed in here that I think get intertwined, and I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that.
Well, yes. Janine, I agree with what you're saying, that it's that by combining all the BOCES together in one bill, it's become a little bit of confusion. We go from adult learning to BOCES to BOCES by the school districts, by BOCES back to the community colleges, and so. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else? All right, we'll close this portion and go through the bill. Committee, on your, attached to the bill, you see a proposed amendment. It's just a cleanup. It says if the proposition to continue the special school tax is defeated at any general election following the initial adoption of the special school tax, the tax will be repealed effective December 31st of that calendar year in which it's defeated. That goes on page 2, line 23 is where that's inserted. So when we're talking about that whole portion of the adult education BOCES that went out for the initial, like in my community, we have one. And so that went out for election eons ago, and it's just been carried on and on and on forever. And now we're saying every 10 years you have to come back and have that, and it can only be a 2.5 mil. And if it doesn't pass, then it fails in, or falls off in December 31st of that year. Everybody good with that part? I have 2. All right, and then the next part of the bill in 2120-109 is the special school tax, special school district tax for the Board of Cooperative Education. So this is the one with the schools are involved with it. And the schools have the half mil, not to exceed a half mil, but the total mill levies of the school district comprising the board may be leveled up to 1.5 mils. So now this is school district we're talking about. Okay. And then 2120-110 is an additional school special district tax election. And you see that that cannot exceed a half mil on top of page 4. And then on page 4, line, let's pick one where I can get 3, says any levy imposed under this subsection shall be used solely for the purposes of maintaining programs offered by the Board of Cooperative Education Services, which the district is a participant, and when combined with any levy imposed under subsection A of this section, shall not exceed, went from 2, was raised to 2.5, because that's the one dealing with community colleges. I got that right? Yep, I got no's. Okay. So then we talk about the tax rate, and that's pretty straightforward after that, I believe.
Well, maybe.
Maybe. Okay. So, committee, do you have questions? Go for a discussion, I'm ready. Go ahead. Representative Clausen, because I sure got doctor stuck in my head. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Clearly, this needs to be cleared up, so the bill needs to be done. I would like to see some language in here that if any community is gonna increase it by $500,000, that has to be voted on initially. I know we think that might be implied, but I'm not seeing that here directly, and I can't support anything that could increase people's property taxes without them voting on it.
So, Representative Brown, go ahead if you'd like to. We're in discussion.
Mr. Chairman, so the only thing that I see at this point that would allow, so I've been texting back and forth with our resident expert in school finance. I don't know if many of you may have not met him, but as we're going back and forth, I said, does this allow for a tax increase? And he says, it may, that's part of the issue. Some districts interpret current law to maximum of 0.5 mil, and some districts levy 1.5 mils for 3 different agreements. He says it's a policy choice. So I think what that would mean is we would need to decide as a committee or individually, you as a legislator, bringing an amendment that to Representative Obermuller's point, Vice Chair Obermuller's point, that would say, we're not authorizing any additional mills in this bill. I think that without a vote, and that can be done. There's a couple of ways we can do that. We can either do that here in committee and do something that is, kind of on the fly, or we can pass this bill as it is, work with the chairman or yourself, go to LSO and ask for an amendment to be drafted that would be put into this, and you can bring that as a committee of the whole amendment yourself. I certainly think what I'm finding in this is that I don't think that this particularly authorizes an additional $500,000 based off of the reading of this. But the way that I'm looking at this is it's ambiguous in current state law. And so we do need to clean it up. But the way that it is interpreted right now with the current language is if there's already a tax on somebody's property, it has to go back before the voters before it can be renewed. It cannot just be put back on by the board again. So that's kind of where I'm sitting at it, Mr. Chairman. I think we need to pass this bill because I think there's way more ambiguity without this bill. But I think we need to probably sit down, and some of us need to sit down and work with LSO to make sure we fine tune this to get it right before we take it to the full body.
More discussion. Representative Provenza, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree with Representative Brown in part because when we talk about tax and votes, it becomes a constitutional issue, right? And we don't necessarily want to have that conversation maybe on the body, which would then kill the bill. So let's do it right, talk with LSO, figure out how to do this in a way that's not going to get hung up in yet another rules committee.
Was that a motion? Go ahead, Representative Ocean.
Thank you,
Andrew,
Mr. Chair.
Sorry.
No, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would suggest that in this amendment, we're talking about if we could write this in a way that there wasn't even a possibility of a property tax increase with or without a vote. I think that would make it probably much more palatable and sellable to the floor. I think even if you put the ability for the voters to vote a higher property tax on themselves, it would probably still kill the bill.
Making notes. Go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with that sentiment, but I think that's exactly what this bill does. In the effort to equalize at 2.5%, they had to raise one side of it. If you wanted to do what you want to do, we would drop everything back the other way. I think there are some, based on the chart in here, I think there's some situations where it's already exceeded. So that's kind of the dilemma of this. But I think that's the inherent risk in this is by equalizing at 2.5, you're opening the door to proposing those taxes at a local level. And I know we get tremendous pushback on that kind of idea on the floor. It'll put tremendous pressure on somebody like Representative Brown's considerable debate skills to pull it through. So just food for thought. I mean, I personally like the idea of this equalization piece. It makes sense, but it's going to be a tough one.
Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I think we've got a lot going on here. And in the interest of time, we still have at least one more bill to go through. I'm going to make a motion that we table this bill until our next meeting. And then what I'll commit to the committee and Mr. Chairman to you as well is I'll go work with LSO to see if we can't draft an amendment that would fix the statutory language that we're all trying to achieve here and make sure that we get this cleaned up before it goes forward.
All right, that's not debatable. We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor of the motion to table this till Friday, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? All right, you have your marching orders.
Okay.
Let's go to something a little easier, huh?
Not for the squeamish.
All right, another joint interim education, and thank you, Department of Revenue, for showing up. We appreciate it. Thank you. School Finance Mental Health Services, House Bill number 34. It's another joint education interim committee, of which we have two people here. So I'm gonna go through it real quick. It's an act relating to school finances, creating a program for school districts to apply for competitive grants to assist in providing mental health services to K-12 public education students for 2 years, providing an appropriation, requiring reporting, and providing for an effective date. So I sat on RIDE. That was one of the things that the RIDE committee heard out of the 7,000 testimonies that we had was mental health, mental health, mental health. Every school district had that problem, and that's kind of where this comes from, is we just need to do more for mental health in school districts, so. Okay, has everybody had a chance to read the bill? Okay. And you see what the, yes. Is there anybody from the department that'd like to testify on this bill? Please.
Good afternoon, Chairman Northrup and the committee. My name is Wanda Maloney. I am the Chief Policy Officer at the Wyoming Department of Education. And I would just bring forward the support from our superintendent in accessing and providing additional resources for mental health services in schools.
Any questions for Wanda? All right, Mrs. Maloney? Oh, go ahead. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming today. I have a question maybe you can answer. I'm not familiar with our statutes on how we do kind of like grant issues. And I know on page 2 that kind of talks about kind of just gives some parameters for those grants. I'm wondering if that's common practice or if it's usual for the department to kind of promulgate rules around the grants and we just allow for funding and the department to provide those rules.
Go ahead, go ahead, Mrs. Maloney.
Chairman and Representative Provenza, so the department typically does stand up guidance that they give to districts and they will put parameters around that. So they don't necessarily have to always promulgate rules in terms of this.
That's your question. Go ahead, Representative Brown has a question.
Thank you. Wanda, just a quick question. This is something that I had spoken in very brief passing detail with Chief Shaner on. We've put a lot on the department as far as new programs, new grants, everything like that. I don't see any appropriation to you guys as far as adding anything. Is this something that's going to be absorbed by somebody and you guys feel comfortable with that at this point?
Go ahead, Chief.
Thank you, Chairman and Representative Brown. We do feel comfortable. We do have the staff that could support moving this forward. Thank you.
Good question. Any other questions for Chief Maloney? All right, thank you very much for coming. Anybody else? Any other departments like to, go ahead. Brian, nobody else is jumping up, so please come up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. I want to speak in support of this bill. If you have not heard any discussion about mental health needs in our public schools, be assured that the need is great. The need for students, the need for staff, the need to address the challenges that our young people are facing is tremendous. And this really isn't a new thing. We certainly talk about this in light of the pandemic, that this is something new or something that has happened recently in light of the pandemic. But if you go back to our last recalibration, the recommendation of the consultants was to add elementary school counselors to all of our elementary schools. Now, this is a small grant. This is a small grant. You take a look at the fiscal note, and the fiscal note points out that the way that the number is arrived at is that we have 48 school districts, and you're estimating 120,000. That 120,000, the guesstimate is that that's a counselor for these 2 years. And now you have to divide the 120,000. So we're talking about getting a counselor for only $60,000. If you can find that, good luck. But we're talking about doing that in just 2 schools in each school district. You get to some of our big school districts, there's over 30 schools in Cheyenne. But perhaps because of its size, Cheyenne has greater capacity. This does allow for districts that have need to apply to the Wyoming Department of Education to try to fill those gaps. It's a need that we know exists out there. It's a need that our consultants have identified and said we need to be addressing the mental health, the mental well-being of our students. And so this does something. In the absence of this, then we have nothing. We have our school counselors that exist. For the most part, those are in our middle schools, our junior highs, our high schools, and they're helping kids. But the ratio's a pretty small ratio. So really, when we talk about need, this is a wonderful project that allows us to test something out on a time-limited basis. This is just for a short time. It allows us to see what kinds of needs there are, how different districts are able to meet the needs in their communities, and it will inform us going forward. It will help us to know, is there something missing in the overall puzzle that we need to think about adding to schools in general? Or is this something that we find partnerships with our communities or new ways of reaching our students and meeting their needs? So encourage you to pass this bill. Certainly has our strong support, and if there's anything I could answer for you, I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you, Brian. Questions for Brian? Go ahead, Representative Berger.
We do need this, and I see that, but my question is, if we pass this and this extra money for mental health, my question is it for mental health or is it for guidance counseling? Because it seems a lot of guidance counseling going on. We need help in that area as well. So do you see this money going to both or focus for mental health only?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I do see this as being focused on mental health. This is a competitive grant process, something set up through the department. So the department, as indicated, will likely provide sort of the parameters, what the money's for. It's not block grant dollars, not something that you could put into a school bus or something like that. Must be used, expended for a specific purpose, and that specific purpose being to serve the mental health needs of students.
Answer your question? Yes, Representative Clausen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the questions that's been posed to me is, what are we currently doing for the mental health status of our students?
Go ahead, Brian.
Mr. Chairman, I think we have wide variety in our school districts across the state. So again, our current model does provide for some amount of mental health provision in schools. So you have school psychologists, you have counselors. Some districts use those strictly as guidance counselors. Some use them as a combination of a guidance counselor and a mental health counselor. Some of our communities have great partnerships with the mental health services within their communities, and they find ways of partnering and working with mental health services within the community. Sometimes that means bringing mental health professionals to schools to work with kids. Sadly, Wyoming has one of the highest teen suicide rates in the nation, and this becomes particularly evident after one of these instances of the loss of life of one of our young people. When that young person dies, and that response at the school, making sure that all mental health resources are available, is really a tremendous thing. The partnering with the community, the volunteerism, and the way that many local providers do partner and help a school work through tragedy really shows the strength of our Wyoming communities. But that's not for the routine stuff. That's for the, you know, the extraordinary circumstance. The routine stuff is pretty much limited to the resources already in existence with those personnel that I've mentioned. But I think, you know, you can look broadly and you can talk about efforts toward prevention. You can talk about efforts to provide healthy choices. So I think that there are ways that districts try to be creative. And then in some of our Wyoming communities, the local mental health is the school. There aren't providers in some of our communities, and all that's there is the school district. So they're doing the best they can to triage, deal with the issues in their district, and helping to support those kids to get to some provider somehow, somewhere, perhaps through telehealth or otherwise. But I think it is clear that we have a tremendous need for mental health service in Wyoming, likely beyond the capacity that we do have, and schools can't do it alone.
Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Farmer, you mentioned talking about partnerships being built, and I think that's a really important thing that hasn't been fully explored, especially for communities like mine in Worland, where, again, we have some of that there, but those definitions of those partnerships, the kind of requirements of those agreements, where it's clear the different roles that the partners plays has been missing and lacking. And so do you see, for example, if a school could, this grant program would contemplate a school applying for money to use to develop those relationships? Or is it mostly about 2 FTEs for 2 years, if you can find them?
Go ahead, Brian.
Mr. Chairman. Representative, I think that's the wonderful thing about a competitive grant process, is it allows for experimentation. I think there will be districts and there will be communities that seek to build on and enhance partnerships. I think that will be a part of what we explore. For others, it may be looking at individuals within the school or school system, and I think it will be driven by local need.
Go ahead, follow up.
And it contemplates the grant that every district, if they apply and have a, you know, acceptable in the parameters that the department sets, will get a grant. Is it the funding that way did I understand that correctly? That there's enough funding for every district to get some amount. So is that correct?
Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman.
Brian.
Again, in reference to the fiscal note, I believe that is how the number of the appropriation came up with. So there is money for that much to happen. How exactly it deploys, I think we'll kind of have to see. Certainly in the bill itself, it does have the limitation not to exceed $120,000. So I suppose a district, if they needed $40,000, to enhance a partnership could apply for that. So there are lots of possibilities.
And I might just mention that some of the small districts, like, well, in my neck of the woods, we have Matisse and Ten Sleep and even Claremont over the hills. So these small districts will maybe not take advantage of this. And of course, they might be the ones to jump on board because they don't have anybody. But it's up to the districts to decide what they want to do.
Well, that brings up a point, Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead, Representative
Which is, could school districts combine together, like Washakie 1 and Washakie 2, for example, to do something together in the grant, even, hire, that's not a far distance for those who've never been to Washakie County. Is it have that kind of flexibility?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Brian.
I believe that would depend on the rules promulgated. I think the only limitation in the bill itself is that the maximum single grant is 120,000. So if the department in its rules did allow for collaboration or cooperation with districts, that they certainly could do so up to that 120,000 amount. If two districts individually applied for grants and then they used their grants to team up, to power up, maybe that would be another way that they could do it, applying individually, but looking at how they could collaborate with the resources they garner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian, this might be a question you can answer. Maybe it's best suited for the chief, but I'm wondering if potentially the boys' school and girls' schools could apply for these grants. We heard over the summer in juvenile justice discussions that there's a gap there with being able to provide services. And so I'm curious if we have an answer in terms of whether those institutions that fall under DFS, but then also have to provide education, can apply for those grants.
It's a good question. Go ahead, Brian.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think I would have the answer to that question. I will tell you that the funding for those programs is different. So I suspect that there would be some hurdles at the least to use school foundation program to supplement something that is differently funded. So I don't know the answer, but I suspect that there's challenge.
Okay. Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I'm gonna ask a very pointed question, but Mr. Farmer, this is not directly to you as much as it is the expansive amount of emails that we've received on this particular bill. And mainly coming from one party. And I'm just gonna say it, the Republican Party is against this particular bill because they feel that our school districts are too highly funded as is, and they should find the money within their own school district budget to provide these mental health services. What would you say in response to the 600 plus emails that we've received today alone, to the people that are saying that we have the money and we should be finding it elsewhere? How would you respond to that?
Go ahead, Brian.
Mr. Chairman, I would respond by saying that it is my belief that it's the prerogative of the legislature to identify the needs of the state and to fund the needs. If the mental health of our young people is a top priority, then expending those funds would be appropriate. We have gone through extensive processes for determining the cost of education through recalibration, and that is for the operation of school districts. And this is not a part of that. This is talking about something in addition to that. So for me, this is an additional priority. When we talk about the wealth of the state and expending the wealth of the state on the needs of young people, I do believe that's appropriate. And Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
if I could, I'm very much enjoying the bromance today.
All right. Any further questions for Brian? Thank you, sir. Anybody else like to testify? Please state your name, who you're with.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lindsay Simoneau and I represent the Wyoming Counseling Association. We wanted to come and testify for this bill. We are in support of this bill, and I'm hoping to answer some questions that came up in regards to previous testimony. As far as resources that are available to students at a middle school and high school level right now, yes, there is the guidance counselors. There is also a program called Safe to Tell, where adolescents are encouraged to either go on the website or also through their mobile devices to anonymously give tips to both law enforcement as well as the school in general of any possible concerns that they may have for their fellow students. I also would be a bad mental health advocate if I didn't plug the fact that the 988 Lifeline that you will be voting on this afternoon does have a text feature, and we do believe that that's going to be primarily used for our adolescents across the state. As far as will this be used for additional guidance counseling, we believe that the language is specific enough that it is supposed to be for the deliverance of mental health services. We are fortunate in our state to have the majority of our guidance counselors are fully licensed professional counselors. They are full LPCs. However, their expansive scope of their practice within a school really limits the availability that they have to provide those mental health services. So being able to have a grant that allows specifically for an individual to provide mental health services would be invaluable for our schools during this time as we come out of COVID and all of the strings that has come with that. Before I forget, my colleague Andy Somerville, who represents the Wyoming Association of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Centers, wanted me to make note that they are also in support of this bill. She does have a prior obligation. She echoes, it's fun when your colleagues write a blank check like that. She echoes similar points that I am making today. And with that, I stand for questions.
Very good. I think we had a question, Lindsay, that came up of, will this apply to the boys and girls schools that are within the state?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is no. You may want to fact check that. And the reason for that is that this language is very specific to school districts and for outpatient services. Whereas our boys in schools and our other institutions, that is considered inpatient, and that education line item is different in the budget.
All right, thank you. Thank you for clarification. Anybody else have questions for Ms. Semino? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Sheila Bush with the Wyoming Medical Society. I'm rarely in front of education, so I appreciate the opportunity. Today, I'm also here representing our Wyoming chapter of the American Psychiatric Association. You will also be hearing from us Friday, so you're going to have a couple of mental health topics in front of you, and I thought now is as good a time as ever to introduce myself. We support this bill. The psychiatrists in the state stand with physicians and our psychology colleagues to just help add a tool to the toolbox. Wyoming is in the middle of a mental health crisis, as are many of our other partners or other states, and there won't be one solution that will fix everything, but a multifaceted approach will help, and this is a key tool in that toolbox. According to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 1 in 3 high school students have experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness in 2019. That was a 40% increase since 2009. In 2019, approximately 1 in 6 youth reported making a suicide plan in the past year, and that was a 44% increase since 2009. When adolescents have a mental health crisis that goes unaddressed, it affects various aspects of their life, from decision-making and other health, physical health things, school, grades, all of those things. Being a teen is hard enough, and when you're suffering with a mental health condition, it gets worse if that goes unaddressed. We think that's a real problem. Students spend a disproportionate amount of their time in school. It's a really nice opportunity to identify a problem and get them access to care. And so with that, I would just stand for questions and offer our support.
Questions from Representative Lawley, go ahead.
Ms. Bush, thank you so much for coming. And you may not, I don't, this is kind of putting you on the spot a bit, but one of the things about this approach is it's good and bad. It's short term. But so what is the long-term view of how we interact with, I agree with you, we have a mental health crisis, and it is not stagnant. It is continuing to multiply in ways that we never imagined a few years ago. So do you have any thoughts on the long-term view of this? Because this is a short-term sort of Band-Aid, if you will. So, and I'm not trying to criticize the bill and saying that. I think that's the reality, but any thoughts you might have?
Go ahead, Sheila.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, thank you. I think the long-term view is so I'm going to answer more in a long-term view of mental health in the state, maybe less so a long-term view of this specific program. I think the long-term view of mental health in the state is all of us coming together to identify we have a problem, right? That was our first step. We're there. The governor has a mental health roundtable. It's a key component of his health task force on which many organizations sit, including the Medical Society and physicians. It's going to be, again, this multifaceted approach. It's changing the societal views towards mental health. It's identifying stigma and recognizing that then it's not a disease, or it's a condition, not something that someone chooses or a weakness inside of someone. I just think we have a lot of conversation to have. We're moving the needle. We're doing it slowly. It's going to be a lot of tools. I'm going to talk to you about a different tool on Friday that I think will help. It's just combining all of those together. And I keep talking about a quilt, and I don't know why I'm not a quilter, but I feel like in 10 years, we're trying to build a quilt, and each little block that we're sewing will ultimately come together into one sort of comprehensive quilt that can maybe help the state and lift all boats.
Further questions? Further questions from the committee for Ms. Sheila Bush? Thank you very much for showing up. Continuing our public input, comments.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. I'll make this brief. We're here in support of this bill. We know that our students succeed when they're both healthy and happy in the classrooms. We also know that this provides a classroom management tool for our educators. So when students are hurting, there are behaviors that are displayed in the classroom. And some of that time, that instruction time, is taken up by educators in dealing with those students. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Questions for Tate? We appreciate your comment. Thank you. Next? Nope. Go ahead. Come on up.
There we go. I had that wrong yesterday. Thank you so much. My name is, Mr. Chairman, my name is Rhea Parsons. I lead a substance abuse prevention and mental health promotion effort called the Wyoming Prevention Action Alliance that's under the umbrella of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. So we work with our membership is made up in part of community coalitions that exist in every county across the state. We were talking about relationships earlier. So that's where your substance abuse prevention and suicide prevention dollars, as they're flowing down into those counties, those communities are working hard to build relationships that exactly what you're talking about. When we discuss tackling the issue of mental health, we like to look at the data as much as we possibly can. And while I'm guessing you maybe have heard of this, but I wanted to make sure and provide it to you. Wyoming participates, many of the school districts participate in a survey called the Prevention Needs Assessment, which is administered by the Wyoming Survey and Analysis Center. So these are youth that are self-reporting, 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And they self-report on a multitude of issues, from substance use to mental health and those sorts of things. So I just wanted to, from the youth's mouth themselves, provide you just some quick data as you are making your decision and moving forward. So for example, under the conversation of depression, in 2012, when this survey was conducted, the number of youth that reported that they were depressed all of the time was 4.72%. In 2020, which 2022 is just about to be released, but in 2020, that number went up to 7.25%. When we talk about the number of youth that have experienced depression never or none of the time, in 2012 was 43.98%, and in 2020, that number dropped to 35.31%. So, and this survey takes a look at depression, hopelessness, nervousness, restlessness, suicide attempted, suicide considered, as well as worthlessness. And in all of those categories, our numbers are trending in the ways that we do not want them to be trending. Sounds like you all know that, but I definitely wanted to make sure that you knew that the prevention needs assessment was there. These are the kids that are reporting themselves. And as a former child advocate, I definitely wanted to get up here and speak on behalf of them. For the Wyoming Prevention Action Alliance, we like anything that provides increased access to mental health for youth. On a personal note, I can tell you I have two sons that are about to turn 23 and 24. I have raised them here in Wyoming, and they both lost a peer, at least one peer, to suicide every year from 7th grade through their senior year of high school, and as well as into college. So this has been an ongoing conversation in our home and with our family as our sons. I don't know about you all, but I don't recall a single person passing away when I was in junior high and high school. And my sons have experienced at least 10 or more, each of them. So just something I wanted to share with you and let you know that we're here to provide education as requested.
Questions for Rhea? Go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. I wanted to ask you about the funding part of your organization,
Okay.
where the money comes from, and just kind of get a sense of what that is and how much private interest there is in supporting programs related to this.
So, as you know, the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police actually overall is a prevention organization. So the funds that they receive go towards things like underage drinking or crisis intervention training, that sort of thing. So our work is, we don't actually fund programs. We don't, for the most part, really what we do is just bring everybody to the table to talk about these things. Since all of the communities have coalitions, and because there's so many statewide partners here, we just bring everybody to have the conversation. What are we seeing? How do we connect those people? And then just provide education upon request. So there's, WASCOP itself receives some, of course, they receive state dollars, but specifically what we do is just private foundation money.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rhea.
Yes.
And thank you for coming in and talking about your family. Mine's the same way. I raised 3 boys, and every one of them seen somebody in their class, so.
Yep.
All right.
Right.
Any
Thank
more
you.
questions for Rhea? Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Anybody else like to testify? Public input?
Mr. Chairman, my name is Bruce Perkland. I'm the Director for the Wyoming Youth Service Association. We provide, our agencies have crisis shelters, group homes, residential treatment centers, PRTF, and many of our programs also have prevention programs that they offer. So we'd be certainly in support of this bill. Any help that the students we have can get through schools, and we see certainly a great need for more help. We hope that the grant process will touch on a lot of things, as you've mentioned, in terms of being collaborative with other services within town. So we're not just shifting therapists from one place into another, but the pool is just too short, and we need to find ways that all those can be shared. Our RTCs have schools. And to answer Representative Provenza's question, in the past, that has been difficult in terms of being able to access grants through the Department of Education to meet those needs for us. So that would be something important that we'll be working on too in the future. So with that, I'd stand for any question.
Questions for Bruce? We appreciate your testimony. Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. All right, we'll close public testimony. Is there anybody on Zoom? Being as it snowed today. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
I'd like to move the bill.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Brown and by Representative Provenza.
Discussion? Can I discuss?
Yes, let's have a discussion. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make it clear, okay, that our guidance counselors are overwhelmed. They are dual certified, guidance and mental health. I'm in the trenches and I see it a lot. And our guidance counselors are being polarized by administration. Hey, we got to move this kid over here, or a parent. Can you get my kid out of this class? Or another teacher. We're going to move this kid into this class because this kid's being successful. And now all of a sudden we have all these tools, safe to tell, friends worried about friends because we're getting the word out even more and more and all this. And then crisis hits and, you know, guidance stops. I'm just letting you know, I believe guidance is also a mental health because we need to provide guiding for academic success and work success and all that and classroom success. But we also need help with this mental health issue. And I am in full support of this. We need more mental health issue, more mental health, more money to help us with our mental health issues that are going on, because there's a lot of crises. And when we're in crisis mode, it is chaotic in the school and it is very difficult. But we get, you know, we get right to these kids. Let's help them out. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Berger. Representative Lawley?
Mr. Chairman, there is a great need in mental health. We've got to do better in Wyoming, so I'll support the moving of the bill. But I would really like to see this as a topic we dig into in the interim, a more comprehensive approach working with other agencies that give our communities a pathway to build better partnerships. So.
You're here. Anybody else want to comment on the bill? Question is being called. We'll go to vote.
Representative Allred,
Aye.
Representative Andrew,
No.
Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Clausten. Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Obermueller,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Chairman Northrup.
Aye.
That's 8 ayes and 1 no for a due pass.
Thank you. Did anybody come here to talk about 137? Anybody like to give public comment on 137? It was listed. We're not going to get to it till Wednesday of next week because that's when good Representative Newsom will be back. So it's her bill. Anybody? All right. We're adjourned.